Okay, thank you. Welcome back to the Community Outcomes meeting, and we'll move on to the last main item on the agenda, which is around neighbourhood policing. And this is something that clearly, again, within the police and crime plan, I've been very committed to, and in terms of the public and the people that we work with, it is something of high importance with regards to local policing. And again, in terms of the budget that was set earlier this year to recruit an extra 264 officers and staff, a good number of these were allocated to neighbourhood policing. And certainly when I go out to public meetings and engage with partners, it is always a topic of keen interest amongst members of the public and elected members as well. So I also, in the last 12 months, as part of my role as the chair of the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, got involved in what was called the Home Office's Frontline Review, and there were a number of aspects that were very relevant there to neighbourhood policing as well. So with that, by way of just a bit of background, I'll now ask for an update on the neighbourhood policing in West Yorkshire.
Yeah, and this is, as I've said many times before, we know how to do neighbourhood policing well in West Yorkshire. We've got a long history and credible evidence of doing it, but it's that balance of resources and availability which we're grateful for the investment in over the last year. And Catherine can give us the latest updates to where we are now. A few months on, each month by month it gets better and better.
Yeah, so just in terms of the highlights then, I think we were 17 months into the neighbourhood model last time we reported to COM and the panel. We're 19 months in now. And as you say, extra resources have been put into neighbourhood policing. I reported last time where those resources and the numbers in terms of where they were going, and that hasn't changed. I think some good news is that we are utilising student officer attachments now on those neighbourhood teams, which will lift those teams still further, but will also, as I mentioned, I think in the antisocial behaviour paper, provide a good opportunity to really focus on problem-solving skills, and that's kind of real community engagement, neighbourhood focus for some of our student officers, and hopefully fill them with, you know, an ambition and a want to go into neighbourhood policing as they move through their careers. There's some good strong evidence, I think, that neighbourhood policing is impactful in reducing demand. We've had over 1,200 fewer criminal damage offences recorded in the last 12 months. Antisocial behaviour, as we've just heard, has reduced significantly. Again, a reduction of another 483 incidents over the period that we're reporting. So I think in terms of those quality of life crimes, if you like, that the neighbourhoods would be more likely to be dealing with, we're seeing some good reductions. And I think in terms of the safeguarding element as well, we see some good reductions in terms of missing children from looked after children's homes, and I do think a lot of that is about our good partnerships and our relationships that we've built with those homes, and the fact that we know the children in much more detail than we ever used to. So in terms of some effective and evolving practices, I would pull out, we've done lots of work, obviously, as you'd expect in the lead up to bonfire night, and we learn and we take the learning from that, I should say, from years past, and we build on that each year. I think, you know, especially across Bradford this year, there was a really successful operation, and the fact that Damien actually was gold for us over that bonfire period, and there'll be debriefs and learning from that which we'll build upon for next year. There's a number of different things going on across the neighbourhoods. We've got PCSO at Calderdale who's taken on board, trying to make sure that not just that we're recruiting people from different backgrounds to various places in the force, but also providing them with a realistic understanding of what it actually feels like to be a PCSO, for example, which I think in many respects should help with our retention as well, so that people understand what that might feel like when they do join us. We have neighbourhood training days now that have been held in Wakefield already for our neighbourhood teams, and I've been to a couple of those. It's really good, I think, to bring all of the neighbourhood staff together for albeit a short period of time, but for them to, across a district, understand what each of them are dealing with, some of the issues, some of the good partnerships that they're able to maintain, and some real learning, I think, across some of those days. And certainly there are plans for Bradford and Calderdale to hold their training days for all of their neighbourhood staff, and other districts are following on too. Kirklees have taken that one step further, and they have their neighbourhood training days alongside Safer Kirklees, so they're being done in partnership, which again I think is a really positive way forward in terms of doing those training inputs. Visibility is something that we talk about a lot, and I know that members of the public ask about a lot and comment upon in terms of neighbourhood policing. We have an abstraction and a deployment policy, and as you would expect, we monitor that regularly via local policing and also via the local accountability meetings. We use our PCSOs in terms of patrol and ward plans, not just in terms of problem solving, but in terms of locations where we have high footfall or places that we think that it would be value for them to be seen by members of the community. And as we've already mentioned in a previous paper, we work jointly with partners and businesses across town and city centres to make sure that we've got deployments across those areas of high footfall during the day, but also on night safe briefings too. Moving on to community engagement, the minimum standards of engagement I won't read out, are the same as last time and are set out in our neighbourhood strategy. Community alert, as we've already mentioned, has continued to grow. We've now got just short of 12,000 registered users, and certainly as a member of the public who's signed up to my local neighbourhood community alert, I know I get lots of really good messages, positive messages, crime prevention messages, information about where things are happening from my local neighbourhood policing team. I think there's certainly more that we can do now that that's embedded to move that on to the next level, but we had to get to a point where it was embedded across neighbourhoods before we can move it on. Leeds districts have recently, just by way of example of different kinds of engagement, held a virtual meeting via Facebook, which enabled people to ask and answer questions kind of live time. We did have some issues with the IT around that, but I think the principle and the feedback we had was good, so once we make sure the IT works properly, we'll make sure that we have the potential to roll that out across other districts. Again, there's some really good examples there of, you know, how the street safe team are involved in Leeds in problem solving, different walkabouts with partner agencies, which I know happen in a number of different places, and I know that we've had a number of elected members at different times as well, and local councillors going out and about with our neighbourhood policing teams to really see what kind of issues that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. In terms of partnership working, I think that's really strong and has just continued to develop and go from strength to strength across all of the districts. Difficult to pull out one particular, there's lots and lots of examples there across every one of the districts about how we're working in partnership. When we move on to prevention and early intervention, we just started in the same way that we have the Neighbourhood Learning Forum. We've now got an early action meeting which involves partners and police leads across each of the districts, again to try and capture the learning in terms of how the different districts are developing early action, to make sure that as far as we can there is a consistency to our police offer, and things like the types of things that we are measuring in terms of early action and intervention, but accepting the fact that there are differences across different areas and some good practice that we can all learn from. So that meeting is now ongoing, and I think there's one next week which I am also going to dip into to make sure that I keep up to date with all of the different things that are going on across the districts as well. Laid out there are the kind of ambition in terms of the early action around family experience, the leadership, the strategy, the culture and the workforce development. And then finally, in terms of ongoing work in future, to try and pick out some things, some different things, we have a staff member who's developing a resource, police and education, PolEd, which is an educational package which will be designed for teachers and delivered by teachers. So this is about trying to, it's obviously age appropriate, but it's about trying to teach the youngsters about how things, different offences, theft, assault, harassment, etc., how they might be involved in them as suspects, victims, witnesses, especially with the kind of increase in that cyber online issues with young people being much more involved in that kind of things, making sure that they we give them some good prevention advice and that they don't get involved in something they might be oblivious to until it's too late. We're going to pilot that with selected schools across Leeds District from April, and the aim then is to open that up to our school partners to be able to deliver to their young people once we've piloted it in Leeds. We've started some work with learning and organisational development to pick up on some refresher training for our PCSOs, because some of our PCSOs now have been with us for a significant number of years, and it's important that they get the refresh on the training and the powers. They'll get it at districts anyway, in pockets, but just to apply some consistency across the force. The post-implementation review, which we commented upon a couple of papers ago, I think, recommended an additional dip sample exercise in terms of what logs neighbourhood police officers are attending and being deployed to, which obviously also fits in with the abstraction policy. So that's being conducted this month, and then that will go to local accountability meetings in January 2020. We've already talked about problem solving and the ASVAT tool and the serious violent crime funding. We've managed via that funding to secure a couple of neighbourhood policing team vans that we can use as an engagement tool within communities at local events, which I think will be another good tool for neighbourhood policing teams to utilise, particularly some of those rural areas. And as I've mentioned, we're waiting to fully embed that community alert system, and then we'll think about whether we purchase any of the add-ons that can give us greater capacity and capability around that piece of software. So I think in summary, there's a lot going on, as there always is in neighbourhood policing. There's always things that we can do better and learn from, but I think every time I go out onto the districts, it's really clear when you speak to the neighbourhood policing teams that they've got really strong partnerships. They really do understand their localities and the people that they're working with on a day-to-day basis, and they are doing some really excellent problem-solving work to make people's lives better in the places that they live.
Yeah, no, thank you. And, I know there'll inevitably be a bit of crossover with the last item around ASB, but as you know, this is a sort of continuing area of focus for myself and the sort of the public at large. So I guess the first question is around about the reductions we have seen in criminal damage and antisocial behaviour, and it's how we know that the neighbourhood policing teams are having the sort of greatest impact on that demand.
I think that reduction has been consistent since the new model was implemented. We can see that it is very much that kind of crime type where the problem-solving occurrences are focused, as you would expect, because it's the type of problem that you would expect neighbourhood policing officers to be dealing with. And where we can, so for example, with the reductions we've seen with missing children, we have done pieces of work within performance review to make sure, to try and understand better the reasons for some of those reductions, to make sure they are true reductions and not as a result of any strange recording practices that might have come about that we're unaware of. And I think it is clear from the missing people point of view, almost, definitely, that it is as a result of those links and partnerships with the homes, the better holding to account of some of those homes by us and the local authority that have reduced the risk to some of those children and therefore the times that they go missing.
Okay, so there is some detailed work there going in around the impact and the input of the neighbourhood policing teams. And you did mention this, Kathleen, but clearly I totally agree that there's been some excellent work around the issue of fireworks, particularly in the run-up to Halloween and the bonfire period. But certainly, when we look at some of the figures around the week commencing 28th of October to week ending 10th of November to the same period last year does suggest an increase of about 48% in those types of calls, and it was just really checking that we had the right approach to this.
Yeah, I think the figure of 48% actually refers, it's a 12-month figure that. So during the bonfire period there was a 36% increase.
Right.
And then the 48% refers to antisocial behaviour over that increase of a 12-month period.
Yep.
And that includes things like New Year's Eve and also things like religious festivals where fireworks are let off and people don't understand what's happening and report it as an antisocial behaviour issue as opposed to recognising that it might be a cultural event or a wedding, etc. I think there's lots of publicised events as well around fireworks and disorder, which I think this year have contributed to the increase in the number of reports that we've had. I think that's another issue. But again, I mentioned before about the debrief that we always have in relation to that kind of period of the year, and that will progress again this year. And any learning that we can get and understanding about any of those increases, whether they were preventable or not, then we can obviously that will be fed into the debrief.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Just a follow-on question on the volume of ASB. So October this year was the first month this year where we've seen an increase in the level of ASB compared to the same month last year. Is that just a one-off or signifying a...
Yeah, there's no indications that there's nothing to give us any indication it's going to be a sudden increase in ASB. Well, the whole thing on the roll in 12 months, in terms of the interesting bit about that is that crime and antisocial behaviour incidents have both been down, as reported earlier. So we'll monitor it, but we're not aware of it being a significant change.
No.
Yeah, because certainly, when I've spoken to you, John, and others around the perception around the activity in the run-up to Halloween and bonfire night, that it felt relatively calm compared to previous years, but of course, we had that unfortunate incident in a part of Leeds, which perhaps has disproportionately impacted on the number of calls that came in around that incident.
So, as you said, the planning preparation and the run-up have all been similar. I wonder whether some of it is about recording as well each year that goes by, but the overarching picture is still a good one.
Okay. So I'll come back to a question that I started on a little while ago. So, obviously, unfortunately, we know about the rises in youth crime and youth violence, and it's the use of weapon sweeps that is mentioned within the report, and community-led weapon sweeps, and it's just understanding how those are put in place and conducted in those areas.
Okay, well, as you would expect with any of our deployments around Genlock and other policing activity, these are intelligence-led. So we've got some examples of them being used. I think Kirklees is probably a good example of when we get intelligence in, whether that's intelligence into police systems or park systems. We had some intelligence about some potential for weapons being secreted at the back of some shops on some spare land. And so along with partners, we did a weapon sweep in that area and recovered a kitchen knife and a box of blank firing cartridges. So we do, when we get the intelligence and a particular incident has happened, we do conduct the sweeps. We've also got other tactics such as the knife arches as well, clearly, that we utilise as part of Genlock, and we've utilised those at railway stations and college campuses, etc. I think it's definitely, now we've embedded the Genlock patrol, something that we can, in partnership, and I think probably moving on with the connections with the violence reduction unit, do more of in a community-led kind of way. I think that's the trick to moving it towards a community taking ownership of a particular place and conducting weapon sweeps as part of their general policing of an area, in inverted commas.
Yeah, and you know, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you know, knives of one sort or another are readily available from retailers and all sorts of outlets. But on the other hand, you know, I think they can act as a deterrent, and it's just that visibility around that, you know, where it's required and there is that intelligence, then we will deploy those knife sweeps where required.
Yeah. And then I think it's about publicising those, but being, again, careful and balanced about how we publicise it and how we publicise what we found to make sure that we are balancing that reassurance versus potentially, you know, glamorising that kind of issue.
No,
it's a really tricky balance, I think.
No, thank you. You've already sort of partly answered this, Catherine. I guess it's just reinforcing that sort of abstraction policy, unless you've got anything further to say on that.
I think just to say that, you know, the neighbourhood SLT leads, the inspectors, the sergeants are very clear that they must gatekeep and ensure as far as they can that their neighbourhood staff are deployed to. They're not ring-fenced from deploying to incidents, because there are some incidents that absolutely require neighbourhood deployment, and that's absolutely right that they do that. But that they are ring-fenced from the day-to-day call handling, that that we make sure we stick to that deployment and abstraction policy. We're doing further dip sampling, and it's going to the lands in January, like I mentioned before.
But you get a sense that that's improving.
Yeah, and so is the CCC in terms of the things that they deploy neighbourhood officers and PCSOs to.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's something that we just need to keep revisiting and reiterating, because, you know, as the Chief mentioned before, there is a really difficult balance between somebody ringing the police because they need us and a resource being deployable at the time versus ring-fencing certain people to do longer-term problem solving, and that is an on-the-ground decision that people have to make day to day, and we can give the kind of direction and the guidance about what we expect, but they will have to make those decisions based on risk, and that's what I expect them to do.
Okay, and again, you've partly touched on this around good examples of NPT activity across the districts and the good practice, and it's really just how that is being, you know, whether it's through the neighbourhood forums or whatever, how that is rolled out and improved.
I think there's neighbourhood forums. We regularly capture good practice and learning from each of the lands as we go around on the local accountability meetings. And then in the months in between the local accountability meetings, there is the local policing governance board, which I chair, and where then we are in a collective environment where we can share good practice, and that is something that we do at the end of each of the sessions, whether that's about crime or reassurance, etc. So there's opportunity on a district basis to share that, and then for us to come back and from a local policing point of view to share that across the district, and there's also that collective forum either at LPGB or the neighbourhood forums to share that good practice. Okay,
and again, connected to that is around the problem solving ethos and approach across the districts, and again, is there a way of further developing the sort of reporting of that, and how we have a better angle, if you like, around the problem solving agenda that's being developed?
Okay, so I think in answer to the first bit of your question, yes, I'm confident that the neighbourhood officers and some of our other officers as well, but specifically the neighbourhood officers, are confident and understand problem solving, and our PCSOs. I've already mentioned the review of problem solving occurrences and so on, so we can always learn when we have a peer review. There'll always be things that we can learn, and that's good. We can take those things forward. In terms of the second part of your question, I don't just clarify what you mean in terms of...
Well, I suppose it's in terms of... obviously we've got some anecdotal or some text around some of the problem-solving work, but whether there's a more... As this grows and develops, whether there's more of a performance management aspect around how that is measured in some way.
And possibly a process map that shows the route that you expect officers to take.
For problem solving?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they've got all of the problem solving training that they've undertaken, how they monitor it and look at it through the problem solving occurrences on the niche element to it. I think we've got the right structures in place around accountability, local policing governance, the neighbourhood forums, and they have a specific problem solving meeting, don't you, around things. So
I
the performance manager now, I've just got to be a bit careful.
It's just that when we had the can't remember the name of the organisation that came in right at the start around early intervention and prevention.
The Early Intervention Foundation.
Yeah, and they, I'm sure a bit of that was touched on in that initial sort of work and presentation.
Yeah.
I remember.
Yeah.
To be honest.
But again, some of the previous answers around less adult ASB being reported, less youth ASB accepting it's far too much, less neighbourhood disputes, less antisocial behaviour crime, less antisocial behaviour logs, they're the outcomes we want. So in terms of performance management, being able to attribute it to a specific problem-solving occurrence is going to be sometimes harder. But we can have a look at it. And we'll look back then at the Early Intervention Foundation things. But
there's a process map in terms of how you'd expect a neighbourhood officer to approach something from a national decision model point of view.
Yeah.
But I guess a part of problem solving is to try and flex and be innovative to different problems and how you engage. So there's not really a roadmap on how to problem solve, because that's the nature of solving difficult problems, I guess. But there is...
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you that we need to be careful that it's not, we don't make it too much of a bureaucratic process. But on the other hand, if you were able to crystallise some of that really good problem-solving sort of occurrences, that could be a really powerful sort of tool, couldn't it? Not just for us, but for partners as well. So anyway, it's just food for thought, isn't it, on that one? And then, I guess, John, one of our favourite subjects is around the uplift capacity around officers, whether that's through the precept or through the more recent announcements, and really just some thoughts around how we are maximising that as much as we can within the neighbourhood policing environment and the deployment decisions.
Yeah, so as a result of the increase of 60 neighbourhood policing constables over the last year, they've got more ability to target offenders, do hotspot patrolling, integrated offender management, and look at the problem solving around high demand and high crime generators within communities. And in terms of the future, we're going to have a discussion as a Chief Officer team the next week or two around the options around the uplift programme for next year, and we'll bring those discussions to you after we've had those.
Yeah, and again, I accept it's a juggling act, isn't it, given the other pressures that we face. And, of course, the introduction of the PEQF, the Police Education Qualification Framework, coming in next year. But clearly, as you know, we're trying to get as many through now under the current recruitment regime. And, I just think it's an important conversation for us. Yeah. And then I suppose in relation to detection rates, it's just again just trying to get a feel for what sort of role or crimes that the MPTs are actually looking at in relation to achieving better detection rates as well.
So the types of crime, well, the crime that would move, when it comes into our system, our organisation, they're assessed and allocated the relevant departments based on Thrive. So whilst there are a general list of things that I would expect the neighbourhood policing team to deal with, I would never rule a particular crime type out if after Thriving it we felt that it would be more appropriate for a neighbourhood officer to deal with it, either because they have got an existing knowledge of that victim or location, or because they're best placed in terms of the locality. Generally, as a general guide, I would say that criminal damage, whether it's antisocial behaviour related and would benefit from a longer term problem solving, or whether it's hate related criminal damage. Harassment, again, not DV related, not domestic abuse related, but linked to repeat demand and something that is ripe for problem solving. Public order, and especially hate-based public order, where there's a community issue that needs resolving with partners and communities. And any violence without injury, which is obviously a massive category. Anything that is specifically linked to hate or an ongoing community tension or issue, a neighbour dispute, that kind of thing, would, as a general rule, go to the neighbourhood policing teams. And then in terms of the outcome data, we just take hate as an example. There is, for hate that is allocated to neighbourhood policing teams as opposed to general teams, a slightly higher overall outcome rate than there is on average, so 9.8 versus 9.1%. And obviously we've got data on different, we've just picked hate out there because it's one of the specific ones that you would expect the neighbourhood officers to be dealing with.
Yeah, and again in your report you talk about the new hate crime app that's coming online soon, and a number of other tools that hopefully can assist neighbourhood officers in particular to achieve some of those better outcomes. And then finally from me, are there any dedicated officers to support neighbourhood policing teams in applying for criminal behaviour orders? And if so, do we know how many have been attained in the last 12 months?
So we have ASB link officers that are mentioned in the last report who then make the applications to the court for CBOs. Obviously any officers can apply for a CBO, but it's more likely that people with the enhanced knowledge of a neighbourhood policing team officer would apply for them. Whilst we don't have an occurrence type for CBO specifically, what we do know is that in Bradford we've got 43 currently, in Calderdale 8, Kirklees 20, Leeds 25, Wakefield 22, so a total of 118 across the force, which will be for a variety of different issues that the neighbourhood policing teams will be actively managing as part of their patrols.
Yeah. And in terms of the feedback from the officers, do they think that they are worthwhile and good things to have in place?
Yeah, I think it depends on the type of issue that they're dealing with, the individual that they're dealing with, other things that have been, it's all, I suppose, relative to the problem that they're dealing with. Sometimes it can be, I think, something that works in terms of almost a sanction hanging over someone's head, whereas if they overstep the mark next time, X will happen. For some people, clearly, as we know with lots of other issues, that doesn't really provide any kind of preventative element to it, and people cross the boundary, and when they do, we deal with it, and they might move on to the next stage of the criminal justice system.
Yeah, and I know this is very much something in agreement with local authorities, isn't it, around criminal behaviour orders, and certainly I'm aware of one that was put in place in a part of Leeds, for example, a few years ago, related to some quite serious offending, and and I queried it at the time, but actually when I actually went and spoke to the officers involved and heard about some of the detail of how some of the offenders were being managed, it was very effective, because it then actually ended up in these people been breaching those orders and then
It's a different, I suppose it's just an extra tool in the box, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
It's not one, it doesn't suit everybody,
No,
but it's
no.
an extra tool in the box.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. Anything else, Jane?
Just a quick question on the ASVAB tool. And appreciate it was launched yesterday, so it might not be in full flow yet, but is that something that neighbourhood officers will share with partners so that there's value in a sort of wider problem solving to address vulnerability?
Yeah, my understanding is that there's part data that's included in that. Isn't
It is. We already shared with partners the old ASVAB data
Yes,
anyway.
yeah.
It's just obviously with the new system, it'll be much more update, lifetime, and you can go into further detail as well. So the data that we provide, the information will be at a higher level.
Yeah, and I guess the sorts of offending that it will capture are those that could be precursor events to sort of more serious stuff. And with that in mind, I just wondered if it was of interest to the BRU.
There's
Yeah.
no issue to be able to access it, access to the systems, and if not, we can provide that information.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for that update, Catherine. I know there's been a lot of detail, but it's important to explore these things.